What if I told you that the single most underrated tool in all of miniature painting isn't a physical thing? And don't get me wrong, I love a good gadget. Half this hobby is convincing yourself that the next wet palette, lamp or brush soap is finally going to unlock golden demon level painting. But using limited palettes, that actually does. The sheer amount of things you will learn about painting when you don't have 300 premixed colors available is priceless. In the 25 years I've been painting miniatures, it's the one thing that made me improve the most. And I'll show you how to get started with limited color schemes in this video with fun little challenge using the new Blanche Masterclass Volume 3 set that Army Painter kindly sent me to try out. Throwing more colors at it rarely makes a miniature better. In fact, the opposite is true. If you ever looked at a mini that uses mainly chromatic colors, and a lot of them, you most likely were a bit offended by it. Now, of course, using a scheme like that can be a conscious choice and a statement in itself. But let's be honest, looking at minis painted with limited palettes feels a lot more pleasing, mainly because the result simply looks more well-rounded and harmonious. Starting from a limited palette also forces you to mix more, simply because this is the only way to add more nuance to your project without adding more color. You'll become more proficient at mixing, and you're also making more deliberate color choices. It forces you to think through your decisions and come up with reasons why they make sense. Also, you'll be surprised how little colors you need to successfully express something meaningful on any given miniature subject matter. Of course, just using a color set where each decision has been made for you already is a fun little exercise and totally valid. But since this is a channel with educational ambitions, let's also quickly talk about ways you can use to pick limited palettes. The easiest way to come up with a scheme is using a Gamut Map, which is basically deciding what colors you want in your scheme, but it's also about what colors you want to leave out. You'll learn all you need to know to get started in this video, but I might as well mention that I have more videos about gamut masks and mixing on my Patreon if you want to dive deeper. You can start from whatever basic color scheme you want. Complementary, analogous, triadic, split complementary, tetradic, and there's even weirder shapes that work. At this point it starts to sound like an Age of Sigmar battle tome. Triangles, wheels, strange geometry, but unlike supplements, this stuff actually stays relevant for more than one edition. I'll also leave a link to an online gamut mapping tool in the description that you can experiment with to get you started. So let's say you want to work with a triadic scheme. You'll pick 3 colors from the color wheel, which become your new primaries, and what you can mix from them is going to be your color set, your gamut. And that's basically all the colors you will use on your mini, plus black and white, because we're not masochists. You can start anywhere on the wheel, and it doesn't have to be a chromatic primary at all. You'll see what I mean in a minute. But before I show you that, let me introduce you to this video's sponsor, Miniswap GG. And just like the name suggests, Miniswap is an online marketplace that makes it easier than ever before to find listings of minis that fit your collection, or to quickly sell parts of your pile of shame because you'll never get to paint most of it anyway. And all of that at rates cheaper than eBay. I just love the functionality of the site. You can search for almost anything. Say you want to upgrade your Maggotkin army, Miniswap makes it easier than ever before to find listings of minis that fit your collection. That's because finding exactly what you need is genuinely effortless. You can sort listings by faction, condition, price, and so on. So whether you are hunting for a single missing bit or a full squad or half-built project you swear you'll finish, you can narrow things down in seconds. No endless scrolling, no keyword gymnastics, just straight to the minis you actually care about. Maybe you're looking for a Harbinger of Decay, just search for it, and of course it would be great if it was painted, so we filter for that, and because we are ballers, we go for Pro Painted, and what do you know? Pro Painted stands for quality on every platform. Or what about the full Necron army? But of course you can also sell on Miniswap, and because the team behind the platform is constantly upgrading it with new features, we recently got the new army listing feature, allowing you to display and sell full armies. Just upload pictures of it, and then with a few clicks you can list every unit that's part of it with drop-down menus for still in box, assembled, unassembled, painted, unpainted, and so on. Easy, quick, and uncomplicated. Miniswap was created by a team of hobbyists who want to make it safer to exchange minis online without without being charged exorbitant fees. They are building some really cool features like an image-based mini identification tool and the used mini pricing tool to improve market transparency. So stay tuned for more, and for now, sign up using my link below, save some money and get swapping. I first heard of Gamut Maps from James Gurney, the man behind Dinotopia, and judging by how much time I spent marveling over the illustrations in that book, analyzing and soaking it all up as a 10-year-old, he's probably single-handedly responsible for why I'm doing art-related stuff at all. So back to our triad, I'm gonna pick 2 colors from the Volume 4 set, a chromatic yellow and a chromatic magenta, and then for illustration's sake a very weak blue-green from Volume 3 as a somewhat complementary accent. And putting this on the palette, you start to see that the chromatic colors all become rather desaturated as we mix them, especially obvious as I mix together the yellow and the magenta. The resulting color is nowhere near the intensity of the parent colors, and this is what we call the saturation cost of mixing. And you can see that as I mix all the paints, the center becomes more and more gray. Now, whether or not you want to mix your base colors or you want to use very close premixed proxies for the color range you define with your Gamut mask is up to you. Personally, I end up mixing more because it's giving me more harmonious results. And if you are a regular to this channel, you know that I don't like to put 20 paints on my palette. And if I need a new color, I will just mix it from whatever I have on there already. So let me know if you want to see a second video where I use this set. Maybe doing 2 different Gamuts on the same mini could be interesting, but while Volume 4 gives you a lot of options for color schemes simply because there's 4 chromatic colors in there, that would be too easy, and I thought it would be more fun to work with the harder challenge, Volume 3. The only chromatic color here is Frost Whale, which is a fantastic blue that I will probably use a lot every time I need a blue that stands out. It almost has a glow to it, it's that intense. The rest of the set is rather desaturated. I guess turquoises could be chromatic, but John did choose more muted versions. It's almost like cold meant lots of gray added, since we get the 2 magentas that are usually associated with the warm side of the color wheel, but have gray and white added. And while we have this desaturated theme in the cold set, we get mostly chromatic colors, or let's say 4, compared to the 1.5 in this cold set. But I get that this exists purely because, yes, the initiative of Army Paint, of course, but ultimately to build a set from the vision of John Blanche. And when you look at the first 2 sets, these are all rather dark colors, while these slot in more as midtones and highlight colors. Okay, back to the challenge of this video. Painting a mini with only the cold set would mean not a lot of saturation, which on the flip side gives us an amazing opportunity to make the most of that 1 chromatic color we do have. And it also means that we are mostly dealing with an analogous color scheme here, mostly blues and turquoises with a hint of magenta, which is kind of off to this side. So let's define our gamut to see the big picture of what we have to work with. Let's start with our primaries, which usually are the most extreme colors we have available. In one corner sits the chromatic blue, then we have the weak magenta and the 2 blue-greens, aka turquoise. Subjective neutral would be a kind of purple, which is good to know, and I'll get back to that later. A fun little exercise is to assign the usual designations to our new primaries: red, blue, green, and then also adding the secondaries. At which point I found it funny that the area designated as yellow actually did start reading as yellow. And it makes sense. If you applied a blue filter over a picture, yellow would start reading as gray. So with the context of that, our brain tells us that this has to be yellow. This is how the paints mix up, and doing this gave me a few good ideas about the potential of the gamut, especially when it comes to how I would do my skin tones. Now, of course, I don't only have these primaries, I have the whole set available, and there's no way I would leave out the brown. I need all the help I can get. So we have to expand our gamut mask a little towards orange. You simply can't get a brown without using a little yellow. And finally, this is the space that all the colors of the set fall into. It made sense to start from a white base coat because the colors were already rather desaturated, and I didn't want a black base coat to mute them even more. Also, it would make applying the base colors a lot easier. As much as I was prepared to mix a metric ton during the process, at the same time I wanted to keep it as simple as possible, and mixing as much as needed, but as little as possible. was going to be my creed. So I started the dress from Bramble Groove, the most desaturated of the midtones I had, and this meant I could add saturation wherever I wanted to, for example in the shadows. And for that I mixed Frost Veil with a Pine Hollow shade, which gave me a cool little contrast or speed paint-like color. And with that I stained the embroidery part of the dress, but also most of the recesses between the folds, focusing a lot on the upper body and then also the deeper folds around the waist. That way I would have a bit of an extra gradient, more blue at the top and then the more desaturated green blue at the bottom. Since the wash didn't entirely behave like a contrast paint, I had to apply 2 or 3 layers in some places where it simply ran off, which means I had to do some cleanup with the base color before I could proceed with the highlights, for which I added more and more Sky Shard. And my goal was to make the dress read as white ultimately. So I covered most of the area with this first 50-50 mix. And yeah, I guess I could have started from a brighter mix as a base color to save a few layers, but I want to say this gives a richer and more interesting result, since we will get a few more brush strokes in contrast. One thing to note is that I didn't care that much about blending everything. Instead, I was trying to focus on making the scheme work. I blocked in the areas I wanted brighter. On the lower parts of the dress, that meant covering larger areas and then blending the transitions towards the deeper parts. On the upper body, I would just hit the small folds facing up without a lot of blending. Now, using brighter and brighter layers, I covered less and less area, like focusing more on the middle parts of the large folds and again working more opaque in the upper areas, since there'd be more light catching onto these parts. Eventually painting the most extreme highlights with pure Sky Shard. This is layer number, I don't know anymore. Sky Shard is doing its best. I gotta say, this color was really weird to work with. Like, it's obviously almost white, but if it were a white, I would say it's not a good one. It took me so many layers to make it cover these last highlights. At this point, the paint and I were having a very honest conversation about who was in charge here. As a premix, I also find it sits in a weird spot. Like, sure, I guess it works in the context of this set, but as a cold highlight color, it's almost a bit too tame for my taste. Usually what I use as cold universal highlight colors leans way more into blue, like Glacier Blue, for example, or anything you could mix from Frost Veil by adding tons of white. Next, I wanted to lay out a few more colors to see where I was going and whether it worked. So I put down a base of Nightroot shade on the sword, and I also wanted to try to make it work on the hair. But while it worked fine on its own for the rough definition of the sword, it didn't work for the hair at all, at least on its own. It's totally fine to add black whenever you need to mix a shade color, but I kinda wanted to make this work without adding anything else to the set. I mixed the purple from Frost Veil and Moon Petal as a base color for the face and the rest of the skin, and then put down a mix of Shadow Thorn and Pine Hall. Holy cow, I can't remember these names. I mixed the opaque turquoise with the dark turquoise ink to create the base color for the hair. And that resulted in a dark blue base with blue highlights on the raised areas, and it looked okay. But I knew it wasn't there yet. I put the brown on the flask because I knew I wanted that one speck of the color that was not blue or mixed with blue in there. The one color that would break the analogous color scheme, kind of like a speck of color typically used in a complementary color scheme. Putting down pure Frost Veil blue on the water was like having an epiphany. Just like adding the brown as a counterpoint to all the blue, the saturation of this color and how it was almost glowing over the white and against the wall of desaturation was strangely exciting and left me with a feeling of everything coming together. This is where I would normally show you footage of me applying the color if my small brain had remembered to press record. To create a bit of interaction between the sword and the water, I instantly put down a layer on one edge, leaving out a little of the purple towards the bottom as a shade. Then I mixed this saturated blue with a little bit of Bramble Groove, which is a weak turquoise, and added a first highlight to the sword, and then adding one running in the opposite direction on the other edge. I built that highlight by adding more and more Iceborne. It was the closest thing to a warm highlight color I had. And as a regular to the channel, you know that I like to set my brightest highlights up against the warmer tones. And then I put down a more confined last layer with Sky Shard, which practically acts like white here, and that was the blade almost done. I tried to bring back some warmth in the face too by applying the desaturated magenta around the cheeks, and then mix a colder mid-tone from it by adding a hint of the chromatic blue to make it a lot colder, and then gradually going brighter by adding sky shard. I defined the major planes of the face, and instead of shading, simply left out these deeper parts and everything I wanted darker for the base color to shine through. I filled in the white of the eyes and the teeth with pure sky shard before also putting in dots of this color into these strategic places of a face, like the back of the nose, chin, and where the eye sockets meet with the nose. And of course also the forehead. On the side I also framed the outline of the jaw and defined the neck a bit. I give the hands and the feet the same treatment, going from a warmer base color towards colder midtones and highlights. And to make the water more interesting, I pushed some highlights along the smaller edges and also the tip of these features that look like droplets. The highlight used for that was mixed from the base blue, a little sky shard, and I also added a bit of dew path, just to shift the color a little into turquoise. After that, I simply dabbed on spots of sky shard and I went pretty loose with it, creating irregular spots, some bigger, some smaller, and sometimes more oval and long, and sometimes just small spots to make it look like maybe there's some air trapped in there or light is reflecting, or both. Typically I would highlight leather with beige tones, but I didn't want to randomly introduce a new color, so one idea was to do it with the neutral gray. Remember, our brain would kind of turn that into yellow in the context. But I decided to try adding Iceborne instead and put it on the edges, and I'm also adding some texture on the surfaces with fine lines and stippling. And eventually I put in some brighter dots with sky shard. And to shade it I dabbed on some of the pure turquoise wash, and I'm not entirely sold on it, but I think it definitely fits the color scheme. Probably because the blue wash kind of acts like a filter and blends it together. I was a bit lost about what to do with the belt buckle, and I decided to define it in a similar way I had planned for the flask. So I put down a layer of bramble groove on the symbol and the edges, leaving out the rest, and highlighted that with sky shard. I did the same thing on the flask, building highlights on all features along a central line, also making them wider in the area that was going to be the brightest. I was so tempted to add some warm red to the recesses here to make the flask stand out more, and I think it would have looked okay, but I resisted and I think it was worth it in the end. If nothing else, to prove a point. So you see that in the context of the brown, the desaturated highlight color looks a lot more intense, and I like that interaction a lot. To finish the flask, I did some last highlights with, you guessed it, sky shard. And to finish off these elements, I used a mix of Night Rouge, purple and turquoise ink to darkline and separate the elements. At this point I fully accepted that I will never remember which torn, petal or hollow I'm holding. I promise I chose these colors deliberately. Remembering the names was never part of the plan. On the embroidery of the dress I simply added highlights with bramble groove, leaving some of the blue to shine through, and then placed some highlights. I gave the gem a layer of frost whale and highlighted that with the off-white on the top right surface and put a line on the opposite side, kind of like a secondary bounce line. And then I shaded the hair with the turquoise wash, but also a few layers of the purple wash. And if you think back to our gamut, we said that our subjective neutral was purple. And I also said that I was hesitant to just use pure black for the hair. So the idea here is that the subjective neutral, purple, is actually the better choice for shading in the context of our coloring. This is one of these moments where color theory feels like cheating. And last but not least, I put some definition into the strands of hair using my tried and tested off-white over desaturated turquoise method. So we are going from purple into bluish midtones, left over from working with the washes, and then the grayish white highlights. And I think this works great because the color combo I used for the highlights kind of became a universal highlight color for most of the elements at this point. And I think it ties the mini together nicely. For the base, I finally cracked and added a color from outside the set, and so I applied a layer of extra dark green from AK Interactive. I just wanted a little distinction between the base and the mini. I still wanted them to harmonize, but a slight separation was my goal. Next, I'm drowning the base in a turquoise wash, which tones down my green a lot, and while that was still wet, I dabbed on some dew path and let that do whatever it wanted to do. Next up, I gave the edges of the rocks some highlights and dry brushed the soil a little brighter, and that was the scheme done. I get asked a lot what you can do to get better at mini painting, and the obvious answer, of course, is to practice the technical and craftsmanship aspects. But I really think, besides trying to get better brush control and everything that comes with it, like learning to blend and how to push the contrast, learning to make the best from a limited color scheme is one of the main aspects that will improve your miniatures the most. And hopefully this video gave you a little bit of inspiration and most of all confidence to try this out yourself. This challenge here was a little painful because the base colors simply don't have the range you could get with something like the first mix I showed you. But I think the result shows that even narrow schemes can yield great results. And I also feel I kind of thrive and have the most fun when I'm faced with tasks I find impossible and maybe hate a little at first. And as always, anything I showed you here can be used as a guiding principle, but isn't gospel. And don't be afraid to break the mold. If you feel like your color choice was too narrow, you can always widen it. Add a complementary color or use a square tetrad instead of a triangle to start from. There's no magic rule that will always give you the best result in any situation. Just figure out what you want to do and adapt the approach. Experimenting is fun. Thanks a lot to my patrons and channel members. You're the reason this channel can focus on nerdy shit like this and still exist. And keep pushing that pigment, and don't be afraid. It's only paint.